we're going to look at kind of 3 different properties to start out with for each row, and then we're going to mix it up. So when I see x cubed, what I want to think about is it means I have x times x times x. I have 3 factors of x. X to the 5th means I have 5 more factors of x. And all of these factors of x are being multiplied together. So all we're trying to do when we simplify is to count them all up and write them as x to that single exponent. So when I look at these, I have 1, 2, 3 from my first one, from x cubed, and then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from the second one. So I end up with x to the 8th power. So on the next one, it says 5x times x to the 6th. So what we need to remember here is this 5x is not like married. It means 5 times x. So I can write it as 5 times x. The 5 and the x are not like a glued together variable together, right? They're 2 different things that are being multiplied together. So I have this, that's my x to the 1st power. And then I have times x to the 6th, which means I have times 6 more x's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when I go through and simplify this, I want to look at coefficients first. So that means numbers. So I have just a 5. And then I want to look at how many x's are being multiplied. And I have 6 factors of x, which means x raised to the 6th power. So on the next one, we're going to try and shortcut our work just a tiny bit. So when it says 5x squared, I want to write 5 times x squared, and then times, and then 2x to the 4th is 2 times x to the 4th. So we're going to do numbers again first. So we're going to multiply the 5 and the 2, and that makes a 10. And then when I see x squared, I want to think about how there's those 2 x's written out, and then I have 4 more x's written out. And I want to think about how many x's do I have altogether, and that's going to be 6th power. So on the next one, whatever I have my parentheses, and it's being raised to the 5th power. That means that stuff inside the parentheses I could write 5 times. So x squared, x squared, x squared, 1, 2, 3, x squared, 1 more. So every time I have an x squared, there's basically 2 factors of x. So I have 2 of them, I have 2 more, and 2 more after that. And so I have to think how many x's altogether. Well, I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so I'm going to have x to the 10th power. So I know that you're finding some shortcuts, but we really right now want to be focused in on like visualizing what's going on and coming up with an answer, because that's going to help you on the more difficult problems. So on this next one, I'm going to write 2x times 2x times 2x times 2x. And then remember, every time we have a 2x, it's really 2 times x. 2 times x, 2 times x, 2 times x. So let's multiply all of our 2's. So 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is an 8, and then 8 times 2 is 16, so I have 16, and then I'm multiplying 4 factors of x, and so I have 16 times x raised to the 4th power. Okay, last one, I am cubing, so that means I'm going to take the part that's in the parentheses, and I'm going to write it 3 times. Again, if you can find shortcuts, that's great. But what we want to focus on today is just understanding exponents and making sure that we know how these answers make sense. So we're working really on our number sense and not just like, can you memorize a property? So I'm going to add in times signs again here. So 3 times x squared, 3 times x squared, 3 times x squared. So I want to multiply all of my 3's. 3 times 3 is 9, times another 3 is 27. And then I want to now visualize. This is 2x's being multiplied, and then I have 2 more factors of x being multiplied, and then I have 2 more factors of x being multiplied. So how many x's am I multiplying? And so hopefully you can kind of picture all those x's written out. We would have x raised to the 6th power, because I have 2 of them here, and then 2 more here, and then 2. And 2 plus 2 plus 2 would make 6. So in the next group, we're looking at dividing. So let's think about division. So when I divide, first I'm going to just write out what I have. X to 6 power would mean 6 x's in my numerator. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Make that denominator, make the fraction bar there a little bit longer. And I have 1 factor of x in my denominator. And then if I am multiplying by an x and dividing by an x, that's just going to make a 1. So anytime I have like a 2 over 2, that divides out to make 1. 5 over 5 equals 1. Negative 6 divided by negative 6 equals 1. And x divided by x equals 1. So same thing on the top and bottom, we get a 1. So then I want to think about how many factors are left over. So x times x times x times x times x. I now have 5 factors of x, so that's going to be x raised to the 5th power. My denominator, when I cross it out, I'm left with just a 1. So I do not need to write down a denominator of 1. I'm all set. I could put it over 1. It's just not very helpful, and it doesn't look very simple. So I want to keep it simple. The next one, I have 4 factors of x in the numerator, and I have 7 in the denominator. So I'm going to cross out those 4 factors of x because they all make 1. And now I have 3 factors of x in my denominator. So I'm going to write this as 1 over x cubed. So we haven't done a problem like this yet. So you can kind of look at this beginning problem. And because I had a bigger exponent in the denominator, that's where my factors were going to be left over. On this last one in this row, I've got numbers and I've got letters now. So let's kind of think through on this one and see if we can just come up with an answer right away. So the 6 over 2, I need to think about how I've always simplified 6 divided by 2. So I've simplified that by division, right? 6 divided by 2 is just 3. So that's going to give me a 3, and it's going to be in the numerator. Now, when I think about my x's, I have x to the 6th power on top and I have squared on the bottom. So that means I've got 6 factors here and I have 2 in the denominator. And I'm crossing 2 of them out, and how many am I left with? And so our denominator is just a 1 now. We're all set, and we have 4 factors of x left over. So when I look at the 6 over squared, I think about here's 6 factors. I can cross 2 of them out. That's my smaller amount. And how many are left? And that kind of gets my brain to think about subtraction. So for the last 6, we're looking at mixing all of these properties together. And so if I have parentheses, a lot of times I'll write it out multiple times. But if I have something like this, my brain's pretty good at going through and thinking about how many I'm multiplying. And that's what I found for students as well, that this is a lot more difficult. So because this one's cubed, I'm going to first write it down 3 times. All right, now I need to see about simplifying this. So -5 times -5 times -5. Well, if I multiply 3 negatives, it's going to be a negative. And then 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. And now I have 2 factors of x being multiplied, and then 2 more, and then 2 more. So I'm going to have x raised to the 6th power. So again, I would recommend rewriting, and don't think about this whole multiplying rule. I find students don't do very well with it, at least not the first day. So I would want to write that out 3 times and then think about what's going on. So on the next one, I have an x and a y and a z. So when I simplify at the very end, I'm always looking at numbers first. So if there's any coefficients, and we don't have any here, I don't have like a 6 in front or anything. Like this one had a -5 for a coefficient. This one doesn't have one. And then I do x's and y's and z's in order. So if I have 2 factors of x here, and then I'm multiplying by 4 more, I would have x raised to the 6th power. And then I've got a y raised to the 1st power, and then I have 2 more y's. So that means I'm going to have 3 factors of y being multiplied all together. And then last, I've got z cubed, and I've got an extra z. So if I have z cubed times 1 more factor of z, it's now going to be z raised to the 4th power. So sometimes it helps on these problems to put little 1 exponents on those letters that are by themselves. So just like we can draw in a 1 in front of something, we can also put in a 1 exponent, because a letter by itself, like y by itself, is the same thing as 1 factor of y, or y to the 1st power. So the last one in this row, because my 2x cubed is being squared, I'm going to write it down twice. And then I also have times this x to the 4th. And then remember, if I have this 2x cubed, this 2 is being multiplied by x cubed. I can put that times sign in it. So I can multiply these 2's together. So the 2 times 2 is going to make a 4. And then I want to think about how many factors of x we're multiplying all together. I have 3 of them here, and 3 more make 6. And then this would give me 4 more x's. That's going to be x to the 10th power. So when I see this, my brain is thinking, well, I've got 3 x's, I have 3 more x's, I have 4 more x's at the end. So when I find my total factors of x, I'm kind of picturing this in my brain. I'm thinking about what happens when I count them all up. It's going to be really important that we work on that number sense and we know how to think these through. So for our last row, we're going to kick it up a notch and we're going to work with division, which is always more difficult for people. So cube means I'm going to write it 3 times. And you might have a perfectly good shortcut, and that's great. But this is kind of our first day of notes on this. And we're still working on visualizing this. So in my numerator now, I have a 4 times a 4 times a 4. That's going to make 64. And then if I have x to the fourth, and then I've got 4 more factors of x, and I've got 4 more factors of x, we're going to have x raised to the 12th power. And our denominator, y times y times y, well, that's 3 y's being multiplied together. So it'll be y cubed. So for this fraction, I can see I've got numbers and x's and y's. So first we're going to look at numbers. So let's think about 6/10 and how to multiply that. 6/10, I would, or sorry, not multiply, but reduce it or simplify it. So because they're both even, I would divide by 2 on the top and bottom, and that would give me 3/5. So I already know I'm going to start out this fraction by writing a 3 on the top and a 5 on the bottom. So that's been simplified. The numbers are smaller. Then I want to look at my x's. So I have 7 factors of x on top and I have 12 on the bottom. So I can I can factor or cross out those 7 factors, a smaller number, and then I want to think about what's left over. So 12 minus 7 would be 5 factors left over, and because there were more on the bottom, they're going to be left on the bottom. So I'll have x to the fifth here, and now I have y cubed over y. And I could even write this one out. This one's not so bad. If I had 3 y's on top and 1 on the bottom, I'm crossing them out. I have 2 factors of y and they're left on top because it's where I had more factors. So 3 minus 1 is 2, and so it goes here. You could also think about this with the 5, like when I start subtracting. If I do 12 minus 7, I'm starting here when I subtract, and so that's where my factors of x should be. So on this last one, what I find works well for most students is to go through and multiply first. So it's one fraction, and then do what we did on this one and simplify. So we're kind of combining stuff that we did on the first two. We're doing multiplying like we did on this one, but then we're going to do a simplifying steps. We're going to have 2 steps. So when I multiply here, first 4 times 7 makes 28. I have x to the fifth, I have x to the sixth. That's going to be 11 factors of x, and there's just a y squared. So I did numbers, then x's, then y's. So in my denominator, I want to do numbers first. Well, there's a 2, so let's write down 2. I don't have any x's. I have a y by itself, so I'm going to write down y. And then I have z cubed times one more factor of z. That's going to be z raised to the 4th power. So now I'm going to go ahead and add this 1 right here. Okay, so 28 divided by 2. So what's tricky is we might be subtracting these exponents. I got this 5 by doing 12 minus 7, but 28 divided by 2 has always been 28 divided by 2. I have to actually divide that. That's going to be a 14. So when I rewrite my fraction, the 14 is going to go on top. X is only in one place, so I'm going to write it down. I have y squared over y. 2 minus 1 is 2. Or sorry, 2 minus 1 is 1, so I'll have y to the 1st power on top. That's where I had more of them at. And then in my denominator, what do I have? Just z? That's pretty boring. Then it's just going to be over z to the 4th. So I took care of these guys. I simplified my y's, my x to the 11th, and my z to the 4th stayed the way they were. So hopefully this helps you with exponents. If you've got questions, as always, please ask them in class.